Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming and joining me today. Could you please tell me your name and where you live?
My name is Russell Driver, and I live in Moraga, California.
Cool. How long have you lived in Moraga?
We moved to Moraga in 2004, so about 17 years.
Could you please tell me how the place looked when you first moved in?
Yeah, it was so our property has a fairly large yard. We have about half an acre out back, and it's backs up against an open space. Not when we moved in, not a lot of plantings. It was a lot of bare ground with a lawn, and there's a pool back there. But my recollection of it is, except for a couple of mature trees, it was essentially barren. And it's south facing, so we got a lot of sunlight, and there weren't a lot of plants out back.
Do you remember what the town was like in general back then?
Yeah, wasn't too dissimilar to how it is now. The town is known for its hills and open spaces. A lot of folks talk about the semi-rural character of the town. That's the term that's thrown around all the time. And frankly, there hasn't been a whole lot of development in the town since we've moved in. There have been some new housing developments primarily. Nothing much else, a couple of buildings in the commercial corridor here in town, but by and large, the hillsides and the open spaces are much like they were when we moved here. And that's in large part because the town has a open space ordinance that was passed in 1986 prohibiting development on steep slopes and the tops of hills. And that was in response to a proposed development back in the 80s that would have gone right across the top of one of the most visible ridge lines in the town. And so it sort of sparked a lot of pushback from the community. And that's sort of been the history of development ever since.
Cool. Sounds like a great place to live and raise a family. So there aren't too many other changes that you've noticed in your 17 years being there?
Not in terms of development. I mean, the environment's changed quite a bit, because of the changing climate and the way that the seasons are pretty different from when we first moved in. And I'm referring primarily to the drought conditions we experience here in California pretty regularly. So, the hillsides are a lot drier than they used to be. Thankfully, we haven't experienced any fires. The fire risk is something that's on everybody's minds all the time now. And so just in the last couple of years, they run these sort of practice evacuation exercises, and that never used to happen 17 years ago. The other thing that we see as a consequence of the climate being a little different, I think, is that the wild animals that we see out back are also very different than when we first moved into the house. When we first moved into town, what we saw a lot of were deer, which are still around, coyote and foxes in particular. We had a lot of foxes on the other side of the fence, which we haven't seen for 8 or 10 years now, even. And about that time, and I'm not pretending that these are related, I don't know that they would be, starting about 10, 12 years ago, we saw this influx of wild turkeys, these roving packs of wild turkeys. And so they're all over the place in town. And that wasn't like that when we first moved in 2004. But now we've got these packs of 30, 40 turkeys roving the streets all over the place. And so that's been a pretty dramatic and invasive change sort of in the natural environment, along with the dryness of the hillsides and the lack of rain during the winter. I grew up, I spent my whole life in California, and there's never really been much rain to report outside of the rainy season. But for the last few years, it's really been a couple of big storms during the rainy season, and that's all we get. I can remember around the time that we moved out here, maybe a couple of years before, we once had rain every single day of February. It rained for like 28 days plus a few. I mean, there's seriously like 33 days straight of rain. Nothing's happened like that for a long, long time. And that didn't used to be that unusual an occurrence. And so the other consequence, if we're talking about change from when we first moved into right now, the other consequence is that we have more sort of breaking down of the human infrastructure as a consequence. So our town has had two big sinkhole events in the last several years. And again, that's because of the dryness during the summer, and the storm drains aren't getting used. And then we get these deluges of rain that come down and break the pipes and overflow things. We've had erosion events. The small bridge that's the only way out of town on one end of the town collapsed a few years ago, again as a result of this storm event in the winter after years of dry soils. And I think, when they discovered the root cause of that, it was the expansion and contraction of the soils being as dried out as they are, and the foundations eventually sort of were taken out by erosion. No one got hurt or anything, but it's been like a 4-year project to get that little bridge rebuilt, and been a pretty big deal that way.
That's all very interesting how the climate has had such an impact. So, what kind of activities did you do when you first moved in that you might still do, or that you might no longer be able to do due to some of those changes you mentioned?
Yeah, so when we first moved in, we did a lot of walking and hiking. We had little kids, and so jogging strollers and all that kind of stuff, and some more hiking on the trails. And there are a lot of trails around town, and it's a nice place to do that. I'd say probably the primary impact, and we do that some now too, but there's this whole new season in town and across California that didn't used to exist in 2004, 2005, fire season in the fall. And so there can be weeks or even months at a time where, because of air quality issues, we don't go out and use the trail systems, whether it's biking or hiking or whatever it is. And that never even used to be a consideration. And so, we and all our friends and folks that I know around town are constantly on the Purple Air website looking at air quality monitors. And the other, I think, indicative thing that's really interesting is, I don't know this for sure, but I would bet you in 2005 or 2008, the number of air quality sensors on sites like that were minimal. There were hardly any. You click on that website now, and there's an air quality monitor every 3 blocks, and they're privately owned. So all the citizens in town are buying their own air quality sensors, both the indoor and outdoor, because it's a whole thing that you have to manage that greatly impacts the kind of activities you can do in town. And that definitely was not a thing. And of course, that smoke is coming from all the wildfires across California every year, and some of them are quite far away. And so the smoke gets blown in from very far away at times. So that's probably the biggest change I can think of, other than things that would just be age related that I don't do anymore because I'm older.
Yeah, well, that's frustrating that the fires are preventing you from doing activities that you used to be able to. Well, it sounds like it's a great place to live and raise a family, but the climate change that's happening is really making it a little bit more difficult for the town as a whole. So thank you for providing insight on that and joining me today.
You're welcome. I'm happy I could help.
All right, have a good day.